I got to admit to you guys, just letting you guys tell me who you want me to rant and rave about for 25 minutes. This is actually the most fun I've had doing a show since our last guest episode, which another one of those will be coming up in the very near future. We'll have an episode with my good buddy Adam King that'll air first thing next week. Welcome to Old Man Squad, Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Vespris. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. No matter how you're taking in the content, the subscribe button is a big one. And find me on social at Dan Vespris or at Old Man Squad. Today, and I think I may have screwed up and done 4 names instead of 5 yesterday. I truly don't remember. But today I have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have them lined up. Their tabs are ready to go on my screen. Let's try to get to all of them. You know I end up talking too much. First name that you guys wanted to hear me talk about is Derrick White, who is already a very good fantasy player and now gets the Boston Celtics are Jason Tatumless bump going into this coming season. So this year, Derrick White finished at number 34 on a per-game basis. He played in 76 out of 82 basketball games, which, of course, gave him an even larger bump up the board by totals, where he finished at number 17. His averages this year, 16.4 points per game, 3.5 three-pointers, 4.5 rebounds, 4.8 assists, about a steal, about a block, 44-84 were the splits, which amazingly could actually be even a tiny bit better depending on how next season looks, and just 1.7 turnovers. A lot of things to think about here. This was already tied for the most shots that Derrick White has ever taken in a season with the injury-shortened 2020-2021 season back in San Antonio. He also took 12.6 shots per game, but didn't shoot as well, whether that's his own growth or just playing around more all-stars, whatever it might be. He has since gotten more efficient, so he scored 16-plus points per game this year instead of 15-plus last year. Since he came to Boston, and we've seen the minutes slowly rising from 27.5 after the initial trade from San Antonio to 28 and change. Last year, 32.5. This year, almost 34 minutes per game. His fantasy value has not surprisingly gone with it. And he's very, at least in Boston now, because you kind of knew his role, at least coming into this year, he's been a pretty linear fantasy growth guy. You put more minutes in the tank, the rebounds are basically on that best fit line. The assists, not quite as much. That has been a little bit more dependent on who's been on the floor around him. Steals and blocks, pretty damn linear growth on those as well. When he gets 30-plus minutes per game, he's around one of each. And there's always going to be a little bit of play. Like last year, he was at 1 steal and 1.2 blocks per game. During the half season in San Antonio before the trade to Boston, when he played 30 minutes a game, he was at 1 steal and only 0.9 blocks. But you guys get the general idea. He shot 44% from the field this year, and a lot of that's because he attempted 9 three-pointers a game out of 12.5 shots. So he was very close to 75% of his shots being from three-point land. That is far and away the highest percentage of threes that he's ever taken in a season. But it's also worth pointing out that while he doesn't get to the free throw line all that often, this is his worst foul shooting season since 2018. Not by a ton, but 84% this year when he'd been at 90, 88, and 87 the previous 86 and change, I guess, the previous 3 campaigns before the 84 this season. All of this Derrick White numbers discussion takes us to my main point on White, which is as long as he's still in Boston when this coming season tips, there's almost no price you could set on him that is too expensive for me. Okay, that's hyperbolic. I'm not going to draft him in the first round. But honest to goodness, once you get through the first half of the second round and the sort of team-shaping type players are off the board, I really wouldn't have that big of a deal with taking Derrick White. Go back and look at some of your drafts and look at who went towards the end of the second round. You've got guys like Devin Booker, De'Aaron Fox, Damian Lillard, Scotty Barnes, Chet Holmgren went near the end of the second round this past year. When you compare those guys to Derrick White, yes, most of those dudes are going to score more than White, but very few of them are going to provide the all-around fantasy game that he provides. Devin Booker is a little bit of an interesting case study because if Kevin Durant is gone, then certainly his valuation changes as well. But thinking through some of these other guys, like once you get through the guys that are scoring 25 points per game, Derrick White would pretty much be at the top of my next board. Because we're talking about a guy that will have almost no choice but to do even a tiny bit more on offense. 12 and a half shots. I don't expect it to jump to like 15 shots per game, but 12 and a half going to 13 and a half feels eminently doable when you take out a 20 shot per game guy like Jason Tatum. And maybe there's even room for a little bit more than that. But you're also going to put some more ball handling on White, so the assists should go up a little bit, even if the minutes don't change. The rebounds, steals, blocks, all that stuff should stay relatively static. You might maybe see a few more two-pointers attempted instead of exclusively threes, as they need him to perhaps do a little bit more. And again, we're talking about a guy that was already, by totals, a mid-second rounder. And on a per-game basis, he was already a third rounder. So second-round ranking is very attainable. The caveat to that, before we get to player number 2, the caveat to that is some of his value is tied up in turnovers. So if you remove turnovers for Derrick White, yeah, his value is going to take a hit. And that would be the argument to maybe not take him in the second round, is like, well, you take your second round guy that has slightly more turnovers and you worry about some of these other guys a little bit farther along. Derrick White falls to number 49 in 8-cat this past year as opposed to number 34. So he's end of the fourth round instead of end of the third. So if you're saying, okay, could he be a top 25 guy this season in 9-cat? Yes. 8-cat may be more like top 35, although you might see the turnovers come up with the assists or something like that. So where do I think he's going to go? I think he'll probably go third round, and I think he's a really good third round pick. 8-cat, he's a decent third round pick. 9-cat, I think he's going to be a very good one. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all sports betting action, but you guys already knew that. And with baseball in full swing, football season now is just around the corner, and that means that BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, scores, and even, as we talked about a bunch yesterday, live in-game betting. There was baseball happening as we did that read on yesterday's show. You could get down on an in-game totals wager for baseball. So they got baseball, they got football futures, you got UFC, you got tennis, you got, just everything. We've talked about it. It's the number one spot for sports wagering info. In between games, also drop into the BetOnline casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker, a live casino. So head to BetOnline today and take advantage of their industry-leading VIP. You are a very important person program with level-up bonuses, weekly cash boosts, and all of that is at BetOnline. The game starts here. All right, so that's Derrick White. Next name on the list is Trey Murphy III, who's coming off an unreal fantasy campaign where he, when healthy, was an absolute dynamo. Much like Derrick White, he will benefit from being a relatively low turnover guy. 9-cat, he was number 27. 8-cat, he fell out of, from the early third round to more like the early fourth. But either way, he was incredible. But started the year hurt, ended the year hurt, and so he only played in 53 games in between them. During those 53 games, Trey averaged 21 points, 3 threes, 5 boards, 3.5 assists, a steal, 0.7 blocks, and similar to Derrick White, extraordinarily powerful, or I should say very good, decent field goal percent, very good free throw percent. In fact, when you sort of really dig in on it, Derrick White and Trey Murphy have strikingly similar fantasy games. Trey's going to score a little bit more. He beat Derrick White by about 5 points per game there, but White had an extra assist and about half a block more. Otherwise, they were almost the same dude. Trey Murphy's free throw volume was better, so it has a higher impact. But if you're looking at these two guys and thinking, these are my choices and they're both there for me in the third round, I probably go Derrick White just for the sort of sure thingitude of it, where with New Orleans, DeJounte Murray's not going to be there to start the year, but Zion will be around and they'll have their other guys. I just think they're both going to be great. And I think they're both probably going to go in third rounds of drafts. What I'd say you could look at, and maybe it's sort of too much of a good thing, is Derrick White in the third, and could you get Trey Murphy in the fourth this coming year? I don't know. At that point, maybe you've got too many threes and not enough big man stats. But I think they each have a really good shot to beat those numbers on a 9-cat per game basis. I think Derrick White's going to be a top 25 9-cat guy this year. I think Trey Murphy is going to be inside the top 35 in 9-cat this year. I prefer Derrick White, as you heard me just say. But Trey's become an absolute horse. When he's on the floor, he's a stud. He scores. He hits threes. He does it on a good percentage. He gets you steals and blocks on low turnovers. That's, again, the thing. Is it too much of one type of player build between the two of them? But they are pretty similar. Is Trey Murphy the more valuable player because of his impact on points and free throw percent? Maybe. Do we argue that Derrick White is the more valuable player this coming year because he's probably going to average 5.5 assists to Trey at probably in the low threes? Maybe. Hair splitting 101 here on today's episode of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Either way, I think they're both going to have really good years. I think White is the safer play. Trey Murphy, really anywhere you get him between 35 and 55 is probably a totally fine place to go because, the floor for Trey is probably 60. So, if you drafted him at 40-something and he's a round back of that, that's not that big of a deal. And we do know that there's upside because Zion's been hurt forever and CJ McCollum is old as hell, and I know they're trying to move him. And, you start to take out usage guys one by one, and DeJounte's not going to be around at the beginning of the season, we don't think. Then there it is. There's the, top 15 Trey Murphy that we got a chunk of last year. I think it's okay that I love them both. And maybe you can get them in sequential rounds. I don't know. Speaking of guys that went in the second round last year, let's talk about Scotty Barnes. I don't know why I said speaking of guys that went in the second round. He's the only one that we've talked about so far. But I have two of them on the board that we're going to talk about. The next player I'm going to talk about also went in the second round. Scotty Barnes didn't come close to hitting his value, and he was a guy that we were down on this past year for a couple of reasons. Reason number one was because the Raptors basically came out and said, we're not trying to win all of our basketball games this season. So right out of the chute, you're like, all right, well, this guy is a massive risk for the end of the year. Reason number two was that Barnes's numbers, and this was sort of I think we can start to refer to this as Brandon Ingram syndrome, where a bunch of things all go up at the same time that don't generally go hand in hand. And it's not this year, it was the prior year, where he went from taking 13 shots per game to 16 shots per game. And on top of that, field goal percent went up, free throw percent went up, 3-point percent went up, rebounds and assists went up, despite playing almost the exact same number of minutes. And perhaps most impressively, his blocks doubled. His block rate doubled. So there was a lot of weirdness that went on. To see the rebounding rate jump up the way it did was notable. The assist rate jumping up was a little bit less notable because Pascal Siakam got moved and Freddie VanVleet was no longer there. And so there's all these other little factors that you could kind of roll into the assist and possibly even the rebounding thing. But to see a guy's usage go up a bunch and efficiency and defensive stats all come with it is the opposite of what you see 80 to 100% of the time, which is when a guy starts to do a whole lot more on offense, usually efficiency and defensive stats tend to come down because they just are expending energy elsewhere. Defensive stats take energy. And so what you saw this year was a lot of that stuff kind of coming back to where it probably should have been the year before, which is that the usage was very high and the field goal percent came back down to 45%, which is more, I think, what you'd expect with all the extra stuff. Now, maybe this year was a little bit of a down year in that regard, and perhaps the reality of Scotty Barnes is somewhere in between the last two seasons, which was, last year, he was basically at a 48-78 splits, and this year he was at 45-75-ish. I'm rounding, 45-76. So, I don't know, 3 percentage points in field goal. Do we split the difference and assume he's going to be 46 and some odd? Do we think the free throw gets back up to 77? Does it really even matter all that much? 34% three-pointers was maybe the biggest thing, and then this year he was back down to 27. So I don't know. But the one that we kind of knew was coming, or at least we thought we knew, was the blocks. And they came back down from 1.5 to 1. And so when you're looking at Scotty Barnes this coming year, my assumption is that the Raptors are probably going to be trying to win this year because they do have a starting five that should be able to compete with most teams in the Eastern Conference. I just have a hard time seeing the blocks coming all the way back up. And with Brandon Ingram there, and I guess we'll assume healthy to start the year, is Barnes going to get to do as much every single ball game? Is he going to get 16 and some odd shots a night? He should be their lead horse. But there may be days where he's not the lead horse and the 16 and some odd shots goes back down to 15 and some odd. It's little bits, but it's not non-existent. Is Barnes going to be down in the 60s? I mean, he was a 6th round per game guy this year. Probably not. Most likely the percentages tick back a little bit and hopefully the some of the other stuff comes back with it. But is he a second rounder? I don't think that he ever was a bona fide second rounder. And instead, he's a guy that I would probably be looking to grab more towards the 3rd round this season. And I know we just talked about Derrick White in the 3rd. So I guess the next question is, who would I rather have between Scotty Barnes and Derrick White? Well, some of that is turnover related because they were basically the same. They were basically the same rank in 8-cat. Scotty Barnes jumps up a round and a half. Derrick White falls about a round if you're looking at 8-cat stuff. But I think White's going to get better. I think Barnes is going to get a little bit better both this year. And that's why I think they both end up as 3rd-round picks and relatively safe 3rd-round picks. Scotty Barnes is probably, a mid-3rd in 8-cat. I don't know where he ends up in 9. Maybe 4th in 9-cat this coming year. He's not going to fall that far, though. And again, like if you take Scotty Barnes at pick 30, and in 9-cat, he's number 44 or something like that, but it's because of the turnovers, that's okay. You'll get some low turnover guys later, and maybe you even got one slightly earlier on. Player 4 on today's episode is Chet Holmgren, and you guys have heard me talk about him before a little bit in passing, but we also covered him on the show of players that I thought might potentially get drafted a little bit too late. And so I'm all about the post-hype Chet Holmgren year. And I've been bouncing back and forth. If you guys have been following me on Twitter or through any sort of pod or video cast over the last 2 seasons, you know that Chet had the injured year 3 seasons back. And then his quote-unquote rookie campaign, I was all in on him. It was a very rare time. He made the old man squad target list as a rookie. Because I was like, this rookie is going to do the super efficient, unicorn big man stats. And people are going to, this is like the one. My rule on big men, as you guys generally know now, is rookie big men, if they can block shots and hit their free throws, I tend to think they have a chance to hit value. And Chet could do all of those things. And so his rookie year, we were in on him, and he was great. This past season, I was out on him. I thought he was being overdrafted based on what everybody saw during his rookie year, but not really accounting for the extra Isaiah Hartenstein. And then he got hurt, and so it was kind of hard to figure out what he was going to be. But now I'm back in again on Chet, and my only hope is that what people are seeing during the playoffs doesn't boost his value too much, because he's looked pretty good during the postseason, even while at times the Thunder are still kind of kid gloving him a little bit. So he only played 32 games this regular season. He finished with 15 and 8, 2.2 blocks, 0.7 steals, 49-75 splits. a lot of things that you look at and you're like, well, this all can get better. Because his rookie year, he shot 53% and averaged 16.5 points. His minutes were 2 higher per game. And the steals, blocks, rebounds actually didn't change all that much. Free throw was down 4%. Number of shots per game was down 1. Most of that was because he played about 6-7% fewer minutes than his rookie campaign. And a lot of that was because of blowouts and because of his injury. Next year, I would assume that Chet gets back up near what he did during his rookie season. Like, he's clearly the guy for them. He's been, by all accounts, excellent whenever he's been truly healthy. And I'll throw the postseason stuff up on the board. He was very bad in their blowout loss at Indiana yesterday. But, like, for the most part, he's playing 30-plus minutes a game during these postseason battles. He's scoring in the high teens. You can see a bunch of games where he actually got up into the 20s. And these are, slower, hyper-intense basketball games. The blocks are there. The steals are there. A three-pointer and changes there. He's a good foul shooter. There's no reason that he shouldn't get up into the 28, 29, 30-minute per game plateau, threshold, whatever you want to call it, next season. Simply because, I guess the only reason would be, does he get hurt again? And I certainly hope not. But he's a unicorn. And at some point, he's really going to get to show it off. And so we saw it rookie year. We didn't see it as much this year. I think we see it again next season. And I think he's a guy like Derrick White and Scotty Barnes that probably ends up getting drafted in the 3rd round. And I love him there. In fact, of all 3 of these guys, the one that I probably target the most is Chet Holmgren, because you guys know I love attacking percentages and blocks and steals, basically. Those are my 4 favorite categories, especially for Roto. And Chet's a guy that can be useful in all of them. Although I guess you could argue Derrick White can be useful in all of them as well. I think there's going to be, like a lot of seasons, some very good options in the 3rd round this year. I suppose there's a possibility that Scotty Barnes gets pushed up. There's a possibility that Derrick White gets pushed up a little bit sooner. There's a possibility that Chet gets pushed up a little bit sooner as well. I don't think that Trey Murphy gets pushed into the 2nd round. I think there's an outside shot that the other guys we talked about might go that early, only because Dame and Tatum and Kyrie are not going to get drafted early because of injury stuff. So you sort of like create a de facto extra 3 names that can go in the top 24. And, so like if Chet was going at 26, 27, maybe that does push him into the 2nd round sometimes. I would strongly prefer targeting Derrick White, Chet Holmgren, and really those 2 guys are 2 of my favorite dudes to look at in the 3rd round. As I mentioned, Trey Murphy, more of a guy that I would love to take in the 4th. Scotty Barnes is someone I'd also love to get in the 4th, but he's not going to fall that far. So if I must, I can do it in the 3rd. And then the last name we're going to talk about on today's show is certainly the hardest one to figure out for this coming season, and that's Alex Sarr, who overall this year had a bit of a clunker. He finished at number 161, played in 67 ball games this season, averaged 13, 6.5, 2.5, 1.6 threes, 2.2 defensive stats. All that stuff that I just read off sounds pretty good for a rook playing 27 minutes. But 39% shooting from a big man is beyond unacceptable. 68% at the free throw line is pretty close to what we expected. I think there was a hope that maybe he could get up to 70, but that was never really going to be the target for him. The target was going to be, all right, can this guy play enough to get, points and boards and assists and steals and blocks to cover up a bad free throw percent and hopefully not a team sinking field goal. But that is ultimately what ended up happening. So let's think about what might happen for Sarr next year. If he was a punt field goal guy on your team, if you had a punt field goal build, he was around number 115. Because the free throw was still bad enough and his other stuff wasn't great enough that he wasn't quite able to push through. But it's also worth noting that as the season went on, Alex Sarr started to get to do more and more stuff. Towards the end of the season, his minutes went up to 28, and he shot the ball even worse somehow at 38% down the stretch. So this is a guy where the stuff that needs to get fixed is very straightforward. And you could even go to like the bitter, I don't want to say the bitter end because it was awfully bitter, but like if you're looking at just the last, I'm thinking of what the best way is to actually pull these stats up on Sarr. And it might be just look at some of the game log here. It was on March 24th that you could say, okay, this guy consistently started playing 30 minutes per game. There were a few in there where he ticked up to 30 and, 29s and 28s, but it was at the very end of March 24th, where he played 32 minutes. And from that point to the end of the year, he went 32, 31, 28, 25, 31, 26, 32, 32, 32, 25, 26, 15. So yeah, those last few ball games where it wasn't quite as good. The higher minute games for him didn't really correspond to better shooting games or anything like that. And it didn't really correspond to him being particularly awesome from a plus minus standpoint. Although, like, if you look at the plus minus, a lot of the big negatives were against Orlando, New York, Indy, Miami. I mean, they should have been more competitive there. Boston. These are teams that are pretty good. And the Wizards were kind of hanging in there in games that Sarr was playing big minutes against the teams that they were pretty close competition with, like the tanking Sixers, the half-tanking Raptors, the half-tanking Nets. They beat Sacramento, remember? Played Philly again. They played Miami at the end of the year, but nobody played a bunch in that ball game. If you're looking at Sarr and you're thinking about drafting him, you're just praying that the field goal percent gets better. Because the free throw, I don't think you can really say, oh, yeah, this is a thing that's just going to magically get fixed in one off season. Because, it's not like he was a majestic foul shooter where he was before. And I guess we could also say he wasn't really a great field goal percent guy. But he's 7 freaking feet tall. 7'1", actually. And in his 24 games with Perth, he shot 52% from the field, which, again, didn't translate to the NBA, but he was at 61% at the foul line. So we knew that, he was at 71% at the foul line. So we knew the free throw thing was probably going to be around 70, but we did think the field goal would be better than 38-39. I mean, that was absolutely atrocious. So next year, will he get enough playing time? And that's certainly the hope, playing time and then responsibility to where, and you can look at the last, what did I say? March 24th was when he started to do more. So let's go March 23rd to the end of the year. Sarr was 105 in a punt field goal build. Can he do that much? Is that enough even? 14 and 6, 3 assists, 1.5 blocks, 0.7 steals. 74% at the free throw line. That's kind of dragging you down a little bit. Like, is he going to get 14 and a half, 15 shots a game? If you think he's going to get 15 shots a game, I think you probably put him on the Flyers list. You almost have to, for the chance that something gets better, for the chance that he does fix the field goal percent up into the mid to high 40s, because not only does that eliminate his largest negative, but it also contributes to more scoring. Even if all you did this year was change his field goal percent from 39 to 46, and he's making 7% more shots, you can say that's about 7% more threes and 7% more scoring. And so rising tide kind of deal. Not only does his value improve from the field goal percent side, but he also gets small incremental value bumps from points and threes as well. I don't think that in straight 9-cat, Alex Sarr is a top 100 guy this year. I think that if you are punting something that he is weak at, he's got a shot to be, but probably not to go all that much higher than that. So you're looking at Sarr as probably your 12th or 13th round selection this coming season. And I'm betting that by the time we get to draft season, we're going to be looking at other guys in that flyer bucket that maybe are even potentially more interesting, but don't hold me to that. And those are your 5 guys today. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. That was Derrick White, who I like as a 3rd with upside. Trey Murphy is a 4th with upside. Holmgren is a 3rd with upside. Barnes is a 3rd for team build. And then Alex Sarr is, right now at least, a flyer very late. Like, rate, subscribe on the way out. That's it for us this week. Friday. It's already Friday. Back with you on Monday. That'll be an episode with my good buddy Adam King. Stay tuned for that one. For now, I'm Dan. See you guys on social or not. I'm going to be gone most of the weekend. So never mind. See you Monday.